Okay, I think we'll get started if everybody's ready. Yes?
Yes.
Hi, Robert.
Hi. Good evening.
Good to see you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patricia Hickson, the Emily Hall Tremaine Curator of Contemporary Art at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, Connecticut. The museum is currently open Friday through Sunday. Fridays from noon to 8 p.m. are new extended hours, and Saturdays and Sundays from noon to 5 p.m. Welcome to tonight's live program, a conversation between our current Matrix artist, Ali Banisadr, and art historian, curator, and former Wadsworth trustee, Robert Hobbs. The Matrix series of contemporary art exhibitions was initially funded in 1974 with a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts as an experimental pilot program to designate a space in the museum to show art by living artists. Since the first exhibition in January of 1975, Matrix has featured more than 1,000 works of art by more than 180 artists. For many distinguished artists, their Matrix show was their first solo museum exhibition in the United States, which is also the case for Ali Banisadr. This program is generously funded by the Joseph and Robert Cornell Memorial Fund. Robert Hobbs is an art historian and curator specializing in 20th and 21st century art. He is the author of more than 50 books and major catalogs on topics ranging from abstract expressionism to earth art and from modernism to postmodernism. In 1978, he became chief curator of the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art in Iran, which is a really interesting connection to Ali. Hobbs's Robert Smithson retrospective was selected in 1981 to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale. In 1996, his exhibition, Souls Grown, African-American Vernacular Art of the South, was part of the 1996 Cultural Olympiad. And his Kara Walker, Slavery, Slavery, was the United States 2002 entry for the Sao Paulo Biennale. Dr. Hobbs has served as associate professor at Cornell University and a longtime visiting professor at Yale University. He is the Rhoda Thalheimer Endowed Chair of American Art Emeritus at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. Since his introduction to Ali Banisadr's work in 2013, Robert Hobbs has written 2 essays on Banisadr's art that were published in 2 separate Banisadr catalogs, 125 Paintings in 2015 and Foreign Lands in 2019. Both texts are being reprinted in Rizzoli's forthcoming major monograph on Banisadr's work, which will be released in May of 2021. Dr. Hobbs also introduced me to Ali's work back in 2015. The work of Ali Banisadr demonstrates a careful balancing act between chaos and composure and abstraction and figuration. His complex, expansive paintings are rich with figurative allusions rooted in autobiographical narratives, sonic recollection, invented stories, world history, collective memory, and mythology. He lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Banisadr currently has 2 solo exhibitions on view in the world, the Matrix exhibition here at the Wadsworth Atheneum and also at the Benaki Museum in Athens, Greece. He has an upcoming solo exhibition at the Museo Stefano Bardini and Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, Italy. He was recently the subject of solo exhibitions at the Gemälde Gallery, Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and Het Noord-Brabants Museum in Den Bosch, Netherlands, and a 2-person show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville, Florida. In 2013, his work was included in a show of contemporary art from Azerbaijan and its neighbors at the 55th Venice Biennale, and in Expanded Painting in the Prague Biennale 6 in the Czech Republic. Banisadr's work is included in significant public collections worldwide, including the Albright Knox Art Gallery, the British Museum in London, the Pompidou in France, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden at the Smithsonian in Washington, DC, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Again, Banisadr has a major Rizzoli monograph coming out in the spring of 2021 in conjunction with a solo exhibition at Casman Gallery in New York. Before we get started, please feel free to put questions in the chat area at the bottom of the screen. We'll take questions after about 45 minutes of conversation. And with that, I welcome Ali Banisadr and Robert Hobbs.
Thank you. Thanks, Patty, for such a terrific introduction. And
Thank
I
you.
hope I can speak clearly enough so people can hear me. Ali and I talked about what we might do in this amount of time. And we came up with the idea that 4 different interpretive terms correlate very well with this work. And it seems advisable to use this as an armature for our discussion. So we'll go from these definitions of these 4 terms to looking at specific works of art. And I know there are very specific things that Ali would like to say about certain paintings, because the Matrix exhibition represents almost entirely, with a few exceptions, some of his work of 2020. So it's very contemporary and very up to date. Ali is going to be controlling the slides. So if we could start with the first, synesthesia, which is a very important situation for Ali. There are 2 types of synesthesia, basically. One is normal or ordinary synesthesia, and another is clinical. Clinical makes it sound like some sort of condition, but actually clinical is a situation that's important for artists. And so let me read along with you what I've written here. Clinical synesthesia has been described as a neurological condition whereby the stimulation of one sensory pathway causes the automatic stimulation of a second cognitive pathway. Art historian E.H. Gombrich has characterized it as, quote, the splashing over impressions from one sense to another, end of quote. An example is a synesthete who might hear a bell and see the color yellow. Not surprisingly, a great number of artists, or not a great number, but a number of artists are synesthetes. They include Duke Ellington, Franz Liszt, Vladimir Nabokov, and Vincent van Gogh. Often this process results in intensified sensations. By contrast, normal or ordinary synesthesia is simply a metaphorical type of thinking. Commonplace examples include such phrases as loud colors, dark sounds, and sweet smells. I'd like for Ali to talk a little bit about the first time he realized that he's a synesthete, going back to your childhood in Iran, actually.
That's right. But I didn't realize what it was, but I knew it was there. I think it happened when I think back to it, it was during the Iran-Iraq war, where the 8 Years' War, it was mostly sounds that I would hear and vibrations. There was some visual things that I saw also, but I think it was mostly sounds and vibrations that I try to make sense out of it by making visual drawings. So perhaps it started there without me even knowing what it was, because the sound was so strong, and you kind of like felt it. You could kind of feel it going inside of your body. And then I think this was always with me. I didn't really kind of know there was a name for it or thought about it, but I always knew that, you know, my senses were quite intense all the time. When, let's say, if I looked at a color, I heard a sound from it, or if I listened to like a great piece of music, there was like flood of images that would come in. But I didn't really know the term until I read Kandinsky's book, and sort of that's when I kind of realized and kind of started to like talk about it and investigate it, because I had thought that maybe everybody kind of sees things that way, but I guess it wasn't the case. And I think the way it influences the painting is that when I start a painting such as this one, The Prophet, I start the paintings quite abstractly at the beginning, and the sound is sort of like the guiding force that helps me compose the work, helps me, and by that I mean there's like different notes on I hear different sounds, different notes from different parts of the painting, and then I could also like taste it. I could like feel it in my own body. I could smell it. There has a certain temperature, so it's quite intense. And let's say there's like a heavy sound, so I taste like a metal or something in my mouth. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a way for me to be able to sort of put myself in the position of the thing that I'm actually trying to paint, and just like become that thing, whatever that may be, mostly anamorphic things. But anyway, so the painting starts very abstractly, and at the beginning it's very performative and gestural and open, and then slowly as I work, I start to kind of see within the fragmentations and start to bring things out. And then the figures themselves, they also have certain sounds. So I could hear something breathing or something moving, or maybe like a heavy sound, maybe a light sound, maybe something is flying. So all these sounds help me to know my next step in the paintings. So I'll show here's like a detail of the painting, The Prophet, where you could see there's all these different figures, and all these different figures that are here, they all have different sounds for me. That's how I know like they're alive and they need to come out, versus, you know, some areas that I feel like they need to sort of like stay in this between space, if that makes any sense.
You managed to keep the work relatively abstract. When we're looking at a detail, I think we can easily see that there are certain figures there. But a term that has often been used in terms of synesthesia is flux and flow and fluidity. Mm-hmm. How does that fit in with your connection with sounds? Because we could say that sounds, taste, very much are like your muse. We talk about the artist's muse as, you know, being internalized, and the abstract expressionist regarded the artist's muse as being their unconscious. Your artist's muse would be synesthetic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think the flow that maybe you're talking about, I kind of see it as maybe trying to connect these different sounds together to create an orchestra. So I see like sort of like an air running through inside the painting, and what I'm trying to do is like not let this air get blocked inside the painting, and the flow is the air that runs through the painting that I'm constantly thinking about, because if it feels like some part of the painting feels clogged, I could kind of like feel it. I hear the sound, or I feel it that it needs to be like opened up so the air could flow through the painting, so the orchestra sort of could harmonize. It's about creating like this energy, making the energy harmonize and have a flow within the painting. So that's the overall way of looking at it. But then there's also like little micro internal things that I'm also trying to adjust to have it also have this flow and air run through it.
How does synesthesia fit in with your great love of tradition? Because I know whenever I visited you in your studio, you have a tremendous number of books, you look at them, you're aware of the fact that you are belonging to a grand tradition and perpetuating it. So how does synesthesia fit in with this? How does it work with it?
Well, I guess if we're talking about visual works, like let's say paintings, are also works that they have sounds as well. You know, they're like or they could just speak to me, and then when they speak to me, I know that there's something there that I need to pay attention to, and that, you know, like if I go to a museum and I look at a painting and it just catches my attention, it'll also have a sound that'll come from it, and it'll just sort of grab me and hold me there. Now, there's been some paintings in the past that have done something more than that. For example, the Hieronymous Bosch painting at the Prado, where I kind of like went to this other zone. I don't even know where I was, or I always tell this story where I went there in the morning with my wife and stood in front of it. She kind of went and saw the whole museum and came and talked to me, and I couldn't even hear what she was saying. And then she just left. And then I left when, you know, it was like late afternoon, because I feel like it got a hold of me somehow. There was like a connection and a communication that happened. And this has happened maybe with a handful of paintings in the past, where I felt like it kind of like transformed me to another place. Like I was in connection with the work in such a deep way. So perhaps that has to do also with synesthesia. I don't know.
Let me interject right here that what we're looking at is an Albrecht Outdorfer. There's going to be a major show of his work in Europe soon. And this particular painting has a very nice subtext for someone who was brought up in Iran, because it's the Battle of Issus, or Alexander the Great, who was routing Darius the Third, who is the last Achaemenid king in Persia. And so it does have this Near Eastern connection to it. Let me ask you this. You were a disc jockey in New York for a few years, and you like music very much. Do you play music when you paint? And if so, how does that fit in with synesthesia?
So one thing is that the paintings, one thing to get straight is that the paintings are never a soundtrack to the music, because the sound comes from the painting themselves. But music could play a part, as far as what I was saying earlier, as far as like giving me like these visual places, you know, sort of like a ongoing harmony of visuals that sort of like come through. And it is a big part of my in the studio, really. Like there's certain music that I could just listen to over and over and over again, and they just sort of like take me to a place where. Sorry.
I'm just saying that's the installation of your show, the major show, for those people who haven't gone to the museum to see it.
That's right. So I have about 10 paintings in the show, and two prints. And as Robert said, most of the paintings are made this year, 2020.
Well, you've been extraordinarily generous. And if you go back to the slide before, or maybe to the last one, then one after this, the far wall there shows works from the museum collection. So one of the things you've done is to work to make sure that your art is contextualized in terms of the Wadsworth Atheneum collection. And of course, they have wonderful surrealist works of art, and they also have earlier works of art. And here you, I think, made a discovery of something that hasn't been on view. That is the Temptation of St. Anthony, this Flemish painting that fits, it's very Boschian.
That's right. Yeah, so I looked at the entire collection of the museum, and I just picked the works that sort of spoke to me. They're from like 15th to present or 20th century art. And I think in a way, like I wanted to show my range of interests from different times, different cultures, and maybe like show the way I think when I'm working, where I could pick different aspects from different artworks and use it for my work. So you have this school of Hieronymous Bosch painting that's just absolutely amazing. It's like a really small painting too. But there's like a whole world in there, and I'm very much interested in this idea of world building, you know. I think a lot of art that I like have this aspect about them, you know, be it Persian Miniature or Bosch and Bruegel.
Well, let me ask you, last year you had a show in Bosch that Patty mentioned, and this is the home of Hieronymous Bosch. What did you learn from being there, having your show there, and seeing some of the works in the collection that obviously have been very important to you for years, about your connection with the Boschian tradition? And I know there are other traditions that you are fascinated with.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing to just go and see the town he lived in. I actually went to his house where he painted. It was just like a small, very small room on the second floor that faced the square. So it was just like, it was pretty amazing to see that. And I you know, they don't let anybody go in the house, but they took me over there, and I was asking questions. And one of the things I asked, I said, wow, I could see him in here working, you know, working till dark. And they were like, no, you couldn't do that back then. There was a guild. You had to stop at a certain time, painting at a certain time. You couldn't paint on weekends. You couldn't paint on holidays. And I thought that was quite interesting. And then they said that like later on, he married a lady and moved to that house over there. And it was just like across the street, and he lived there till he died. So it was interesting to walk around the city and see some of the things are still in that medieval kind of way. So like you could kind of see that, oh, he was looking at this canal and this bridge and the light. And so it was just nice to be in his hometown, really.
No, that's terrific. The next slide, I believe, is a Goya, and you chose several Goyas. And this is his loyalty, which is from his Proverbs. What is it about Goya? I mean, there's some things I think are very obvious, but they may not be to everyone.
Well, I think with Goya and with Bosch and Bruegel is, I think they were social critics, and I think they saw the human folly, and they were sort of looking at humanity as if they were sort of aliens coming to Earth and just witnessing human behavior and making notes and observations. I feel like that's something that I'm interested in my work. Like I like to kind of remove myself and be like an outsider, as if I'm looking at humanity from like a macro level, from like an alien perspective. And I think you had mentioned, it'll come up in the next slide, about like the way an infant looks at the world, where they don't know, like they can't distinguish themselves from the world. I think that's the state of mind that you kind of want to get into, to kind of like look at things and not with the baggage they come with, but just observe and make notes, basically. And I feel like Goya, I mean, did that in such a amazing way. The way he saw war around him and Europe at the time, and the way he captured it is just like, he was able to tap into the zeitgeist of that time like no one else, I think. And captured it in such a way that, you know, they're sort of they're not particular to their time. Like, you don't look at his work and say, oh, that was about something back then, it doesn't apply to us. It's like, this is going to apply to us forever, because we're humans and we keep repeating these things. So I think I like things that are eternal, sort of like Bosch as well, where you look at if you could look at something from 500 years ago, and it could kind of solve issues or point things out to our time, that's pretty brilliant, that it was able to travel in time in such a way. And I think Goya certainly is one of those.
Well, this one in particular is the wonderful absurdity of being human. A term that I feel is really important for your work is intensity. And it's a way of talking about the marks, the strokes, the brush marks, the sense of different velocities that are moving in your work. And it's a term that really comes from Gilles Deleuze, a French theorist that I like very much. And we had discussed the fact that actually you did read the book, Francis Bacon, as I did. It's a really tough but fascinating book in which he's dealing with the logic of sensation. And let me just read a couple of things here. Intensities are predicated on ongoing dynamics and transformations. Intensities are not substances. They're more like changing weather conditions, comprising different energies and different velocities. In music, we can speak of the intensity of noise and the intensity of silence. In art, the saturation of a color, that is the redness of red, and its value, that is its darkness and lightness, as in navy blue or baby blue, can be considered different intensities. For Deleuze, intensities can be primary reactions. This is what you were talking about, Ali, such as those experienced by infants before they're able to distinguish between themselves and the world. These intensities come close to precognitive states and unmediated reality. Deleuze thinks the most powerful art puts us in touch with such conditions and thus brings us close to a primordial world with its asignifying qualities so that we have the possibility of looking fresh. And of course, we tend to look ideologically and we tend to see the world as very constructed and with blinders. And I think art that releases us has an incredible value. This is your work, Red, and you've included 3 details. Could you talk a little bit about how the energy is flowing through these paintings and what kind of rhythms you see it setting up in this work in particular?
Yeah, so talk about intensity, like this painting at the beginning. So this painting, I gotta say that it was finished in end of January. And while I was working on it, it was on the bluish side, but somehow it wanted to shift towards red. And I'm quite sensitive to color. And once it was moving towards red, I felt a sensation of anxiety, and I felt a sensation of like something bad is about to happen, you know? And there was enough symbolism that had come flowing into the work that was communicating to me about something that was coming. So you have the blue sun or the blue moon, and you have these white dots that are spreading everywhere, and you have the intense red that it's like implying to me danger and anxiety and intensity. And then there were other symbols in the work as well that at the time, actually, I didn't know what it was about, but I knew there was something coming. And this work was supposed to go to Art Basel Hong Kong in March. And of course that didn't happen. And the painting came back in middle of the March to my studio, where already I had all this, you know, stuff in my head about pandemic. And so as soon as it came back, I immediately knew what the work was about. And I started to add some more symbolism and details to it, such as like this character here who's like, it kind of looks like a snowman, but it's made out of coal or ash, and he has like a shovel that has a crown on top. So all these little things immediately sort of came through. And you have this sort of like, I don't know, like a dinosaur bone and like maybe a Chinese dragon. So there was like all these different symbolism that kind of came through the work, that immediately I understood what it was about.
Well, I have 2 questions then to follow up on this. One has to do with, you said you started this in blue. So since you're classically trained as a painter, and classic painters use an imprimatura, do you use one particular color, or is it sometimes more a red or a blue or different colors that you're sketching out these forces? And the second part of my question is, when do you know a work is finished? When do you know to release it? Because one of the things I value about your work is it doesn't look overcooked. It still looks very fresh.
Yeah, so the first question, I mean, I've been making certain colors myself and putting them in tubes that like they have a certain mood for me, so they become and I label them by mood, so they become like the base of my underlying imprimatur for my work. So there's maybe a handful right now, but the colors are growing.
So they're different colors. You're not like Rubens, who always does red, or other artists who frequently
No,
use
there's like
you know.
there's a bluish, there's a greenish, there's a brownish,
Okay.
and there's like a reddish. So but these colors are very, very particular because they kind of trigger a bunch of different moods for me. They like, you know, be it temperature, sound, intensity. So when I come across it, I know that that's a color that I need to preserve.
Now, do they show through at times in your finished painting? Because I know with someone like Manet, it was very important that certain sections of the underpainting or with Rubens would show through.
They do. I mean, you could see this painting that this was one of the blues that I've used, and you could see that the blue is sort of like coming through, because the way I work is, if you look at the surface in person, you'll see that it's not all built up. You know, there are parts of the painting that are quite heavy and built up, and then there are parts of the painting that are sort of treated more like watercolor. And I'm using the white of the canvas, basically. So there are many different, like if you look at it close up, there you'll see that there's many different types of textures and surfaces, and you know, there's even parts that have been like scraped off, and it's not only brush, you know, there's like rags and palette knives, and my two daughters have this habit of like finding me tools now. Who finds me the best tool? So it's whatever works, you know. And this painting is called the Caravan, which
wheel down at the bottom that signifies something. Let me ask you this: in terms of synesthesia, your imagination is very important. And there's a detail of you can see. Imagination is very important. And I read recently that a study of Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, who really made a huge difference because he saw that instead of imagination being a servant or attuned to reason, that imagination in itself was all important. And of course, he's a progenitor of the Romantic age, which really started in Germany. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of imagination you see for your viewers, because we talked about imagination for you as the artist in the generative aspect of work, but in approaching it as a viewer, what do you like to see, or what surprises you?
Well, I think I put in there what's in my imagination, but there's enough room in there that whoever stands in front of the painting could sort of fill in parts of the painting with their own imagination and activate it in a different way. And that's a great thing about painting, that different people could stand in front of the painting and activate it in a different way and move on, and someone else could come and activate it in a very different way. So I think even with my own imagination, I feel like it's always in flux. It's always moving. Your memory of somebody's always shifting. And I've always been interested in this movement, this shift of how things are sort of stay in your memory, stay in your imagination, or your dreams, how you know, when you wake up and you had a dream and you want to grasp that thing, and you can't fully grasp it, it slips out of your hands, and you're trying to give it meaning. And I've always liked capturing that moment where something is in the middle of like metamorphosis or transformation, or something is like turning into another thing, and so on. So I think it leaves the painting in a place where different viewers with different thoughts and ideas and imagination could stand in front of the painting and project their own anxieties and thoughts and things into the painting and sort of activate it and complete it.
So you would say there's a more open-ended iconography than, say, we find in Renaissance art or earlier art, that freedom, that flow, that fluidity is something that is intentionally open to viewers.
Absolutely.
And their imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. Or else it just becomes propaganda in a way. I mean, if you kind of like become didactic and force something onto there, then I feel like there's no room for the viewer. You're telling the viewer what they should see or know, versus sort of like a dance with the viewer and your work.
Well, I love the fact that your show is at the Wadsworth Atheneum. There's one of the really great Max Ernst paintings, which was unable to be included in your show, but it's Europe After the Rain. And it's a great surrealist work of art that I think evokes so much the imagination and participation of the viewer.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's why Max Ernst is one of my favorite painters, and certainly the favorite of the surrealists, because I feel like the way he went about making his work, he created chance first, and then he saw within chance possibilities, and then he brought that out. So and the fact that he just like constantly explored new ideas and new thoughts with his collages and with his paintings. And one quote that Max Ernst said that it's always stayed with me is that he said, when an artist finds himself, he's lost.
Oh, that's lovely. Can we go to the third slide of the, yes. This term is pronounced two different ways. I have the pronunciation of heteroglossia. It also is called heteroglossia. And the theorist, Mikhail, I can never say it. Anyway, Bakhtin he's a fascinating Russian theorist. People thought he was lost for decades, and he was just getting away from Stalin in a very small provincial area. And he was rediscovered in the 60s and 70s. And instead of theorists dealing with poetry, he dealt very much with the novel. And heteroglossia is crucial for this. And this starts with a quote from him. Heteroglossia is another's speech in another's language. Such speech constitutes a double-voiced discourse. In fiction, it expresses simultaneously two different intentions: the direct intention of the character who is speaking and the refracted intention of the author. End of quote. To exemplify heteroglossia in the everyday world, Bakhtin identifies the act of speaking and writing as a series of performances that require speakers or authors to take a position and choose the dialect in which they wish to speak. One of his better known examples, one of my favorites, is an itinerant peasant who speaks Church Slavonic to God, talks to his family in their own everyday dialect, sings songs and yet a third voice, and attempts to emulate an authoritative patois when dictating petitions to the local government. You are very interested in it. You use a term called encyclopedic. And I think of you not as an artist who is influenced by other artists, but seeks them out in terms of carrying on a conversation. And I also think of your work, you use the term metamorphosis, this sort of ongoing open-ended metamorphosis, and this multi-voiced work seems to me to fit in very nicely with the term heteroglossia. So could you talk a little bit about your understanding of encyclopedic? And what we're seeing here is one of your incredible acts of generosity, and I hope people will go and see the exhibition because you put together, and I'll let you talk about what you did, this 5-minute video.
So yeah, for the video, I basically made a video collage of works that are in the museum And I just kind of, I wanted to show the way I look at artworks, basically. So in this video, you might see like a large painting, but then you could like see maybe like a small dog at the bottom right corner that catches my eyes. And so in a way, I wanted to show how I look at paintings, how I look at artworks, what part of an artwork catches my attention, and how I kind of like maybe put that into my visual vocabulary, save it for later, you know, save it for a time when it's needed to be able to access it. That's the way I see it. And then there's a soundtrack also that goes along with this video, which I think it's Mozart, and it's certain music, certain songs that I could basically like listen to over and over and over again. And yeah, as far as encyclopedic, I think just like what I was saying about the video collage, it also relates to every day that I come into the studio and I stand in front of a painting, I could feel differently. I could have a different voice in my head. I could approach the work in a different way. And one day I could come in and be in a critical mode and just sit and kind of like try to understand the painting and maybe write. Or maybe it could be within the same day, and a couple hours later, I'm in more of a gestural, fluid way of working, and then I'm in a miniature mode of painting. So in a way, what I'm saying is like I could think within like maybe 8 hours in a day when I'm working on a painting, I could think in many different ways. And a word I really like is infinite variety, because I could think in all these different ways, and I could solve issues in many different ways. It's not just like one way that I could solve the problem. And this could also apply to, let's say, I could go walk down the street and I could like see something, and I could come back and say, that's it, I'm going to use that to solve my problem. So that's what I mean by like encyclopedic. It doesn't mean that I'm like appropriating anything or I'm taking directly from anything, but it's more like getting different ideas from many different places and being able to sort of like sew it all together in the painting.
So we could say the video is a sort of short course in the way you look, a kind of exercise in Ali Banisadr's looking.
Yeah.
I know this book, My Name is Red, has been very important to you. And it's a story of a murder of a miniaturist. It's a Turkish writer, Pamuk, and he has different protagonists. And I think this is so wonderful in relationship to your work, because different chapters are told from the perspective of different characters. And the characters aren't all people. One is a corpse, another's a coin, Satan is one. There are two dervishes, and the color red itself tells one whole story. And of course, Pamuk, who is a very famous writer, he did start off as a painter. And so he's dealing with this Rashomon-like story that is told from these very different points of view with different characters. The next slide, I believe, is a Persian miniature.
Yeah, this is one of the works that I curated in the show, actually.
And then the next work is I believe it's the James Ensor.
That's right.
The entry of Christ into Brussels. And you were included in James Ensor exhibition, what was it, in 2010. And I think his mother had this little shop where there were masks and other things sold. But would you talk about your interest in Ensor in relationship to your work?
Well, I think he's sort of, he's in the legacy of Bosch and Bruegel in a way, you know, like another social critic who was sort of, you feel like he has this sort of outsider perspective where he's just observing the folly of humans and kind of like this sort of carnivalesque sort of world that he's observing and creating with people that have masks, and you don't know if the masks are sort of like, like, are they resembling what the inner part of those people are, or are they just masks? So it's quite, yeah, it's quite interesting.
Well, I have to say, apropos of Ensor, I once went to an office Halloween party, and everyone dressed up in their persona became who they secretly were. And I thought, oh my God, everybody is revealed. This is very freaky and very strange. And certainly with Ensor, you find this difference between the persona, the mask, and the individual, and whether they come in sync or whether they're separate. And if they're separate, it's heteroglossia. At any rate, it's a kind of internal conversation that is going on and is multi-voiced. And certainly with your array of characters and hybrids and the sense of metamorphosis, there is this type of multi-voiced sense to your work. Yeah. A very important critic in the mid-20th century was Clement Greenberg, and he talked about presentness and how the work of art should be complete and understood in just a fraction of a second. And he would never see something that's involved in time. And it seems to me your work takes much longer to sort of look at and process and learn from.
Yes.
And I think that's something you do want. Could you talk about a few? I think there are a couple of slides there, like Treasure is the next one, about this element of time.
Yeah, so I mean, I could talk about, because one thing that I must say, I always say that my work is about art history, history of our time, and personal history. Now, some works could lean more towards one or the other, but so this one, I mean, what triggered it was this painting was made in 2016. So it was like maybe several months after my first daughter was born. And I kept seeing this same sort of situation in my living room, where people would come to visit and they would have this same like kind of gesture of like bowing, or as if the baby had this like gravity that was just pulling him down, and like everybody was just like sort of making these offering these gestures. So after like seeing this over and over in the middle of my living room, it kind of made me think of the adoration of the Magi paintings, where it's the exact same thing is happening. So I kind of like bypassed the religious aspect of it and just saw it as the same kind of like situation where like people are like making offering to a baby, a newborn baby. So in a way, like I feel like this leaned maybe more towards like a personal observation in my domestic life that led to a sort of like a art historical reference.
Well, that's wonderful. The next work is in Exterior and Interior. They're both of 2015.
Yes.
Why the titles?
So another observation of my environment. You remember I had that studio in Bushwick where I had this giant sliding door that faced this alleyway, and there was like a factory there, like a metal factory that had been there for like 40 plus years, and they were constantly had dumped metal into this alleyway, and then there was like some vegetation growing out of there too. So every time I opened my sliding door, I looked at this and I thought it was like really interesting. It looked like a surreal sort of situation, but also like made me think about I don't know, it just made me think about, like, I was thinking about technology and what technology is doing to us, and having half of my life lived in analog world and the other part in the digital world. I thought this was like a good metaphor to kind of like use that palette of the colors that I was seeing, which was like metal and rust, and kind of like adapt that palette for handful of paintings that I made.
The next work is Levanter. And are you referring to this easterly wind in the Mediterranean?
So this is the blue that I was speaking to you about, that I kind of like made myself, that creates this sort of cold, I don't know, sharp, cold. It triggers all these different moods. So maybe we should go to this one just to, and this painting is called Only Breath, which is a small painting, also made in 2020. And it was like an urgent painting that I made during, again, talking about my environment, my immediate environment. You know, like we listen to the news, and sometimes news, although like it's always bad news, it sounds a bit like removed from us. Even, you know, we could hear about it, but it's removed. But I feel like there was a lot of things happening during this time where there were like protests, pandemic, helicopters. I mean, Robert, you weren't in New York. I'm not sure where you were, but there was a lot of like fireworks. There were just people setting up fireworks every night. So it had this like weird energy of chaos that also made me think back to my time in Iran and the war. So I made this painting. It was like an immediate painting that I made that I feel like it sort of addressed many different things that were happening at the time. And Only Breath, the title, alludes to the pandemic being only breath, protests, people voicing their opinion by their breath, George Floyd killing, his breath was taken away. And then also it was Only Breath is like my favorite poem by Rumi, that the poem is like about not wanting to be contained, you know, not wanting to be categorized and contained. So it's like one of my favorite paintings. So the titles are quite important because they have to sort of become an umbrella to cover many things for me at once. And this one was one good example of it.
So it's really the concision of heteroglossia we see at work in this painting. Let's move to the fourth term, which is the grotesque.
Yes.
Bakhtin refers to the 15th century term in his 1940 Rabelais and His World. He cites the philosopher Giovanni Pico della Mirandello's 1486 oration on the dignity of man that points to human superiority because of the gift of free will that sets human superiority above mere flora and fauna. Man, Della Mirandola observes, receives at his birth the seeds of every form of life. Man can become a plant or an animal, but he can also become an angel and a son of God. The grotesque is a shape-shifting capability that was originally inspired by the discovery of subterranean grottos near Rome, notably for wall paintings featuring, and the entwinement is very important, entwined human, animal, and plant life. The science fiction writer Istvan Siri Ronan Jr. has updated the grotesque as a, quote, process of steady descent into interiors, into the grottos of being in the hope of finding a core, but always finding a transformation, which I see as fitting in very much with your metamorphoses. His definition is indicative of the many types of metamorphoses found in science fiction writing, in which humans morph into machines and vice versa, becoming yet new embodiments of the grotesque. Since the early 60s, human-machine hybrids have been known as cyborgs, and more people, as they're operated on and have things added to their bodies, become cyborgian. So why don't we look at these works in terms of the grotesque? This is this is a work not in the show, I believe.
It's not in the show, but I thought it was appropriate because it's called The Rise of the Blonde. And it was made in November 2016. So I'll show some details of that. So you have this figure here, the blonde figure, sort of entering the scene with its entourage in a way.
Is this a Republican?
Oh, I don't know. Could be anybody, right? And then you have a sequel to that, which is SOS, made this summer of 2020. where you have a figure, you have these monsters gnawing on the head of a figure here, and this is sort of like maybe it's sort of like an underworld, and they're like maybe in Dante's Inferno in a way. So there was a lot of symbolism in this painting that I felt like I'm sort of like channeling every anxiety, the pandemic, the political situation, all in one place. And SOS was the only title that kind of made sense. And you have these orange fiery skies, and which is funny because 2 months later, my sister who lives in California was sending me images of fires burning in California skies that were like orange like this. So,
oh my God, yeah.
Here's like some details.
It seems to me that with this flux and the fluidity and the ambiguity, the purposeful ambiguity that is occurring in your art, that you're very much involved in a kind of subject position that psychologists, someone like Guattari, the French psychologist, calls it transversality. And other people talk about the fact that we're in a global universe of permeable boundaries where people are moving from one subject position to another. So it's like you grew up Iranian and now you're an American citizen. And here we're seeing the very famous Mos Eisley's Cantina scene from Star Wars of 1977, which I think fascinated kids. It was just, they got so excited about the particular kinds of hybrids that were presented in this film. And it certainly becomes an image of metamorphosis, of movement from one subject to a position to another. And as you've suggested in several of the works that are in the show and are important to you, you're concerned with certain current events.
Yeah.
Would you talk about the last slide, the healers, in relation? Oh, these are your prints that you've done.
Yeah, these are my prints. First prints that I made this year. This one is called Cannons Hidden in Roses. And this is called Nocturne. And they both sort of allude to Chopin, because that's what was said about Chopin, that his work is, I think Schumann said it, that they're cannons hidden in roses. And I thought I could maybe say that about my work too. So the Healers is the last painting that I made so far this year. And it's a very optimistic painting in a way, because I feel like it came after SOS. So I feel like maybe these healers were sent to sort of like, they all have these tentacles and they're sort of like cleansing the earth. They're like cleaning the earth and cleansing the earth, and they're sort of maybe like shamans, and they're like blessing the earth and getting rid of all the bad energy. You have these details here.
If you'd go back to the slide before, after the details, to the overall slide, one of the things that I think is so exciting about this particular painting is that the sky is every bit as fascinating as the array of figures that you have on this shallow stage. It's almost going back to the idea of the intensities, the forces, the insubstantial. So you have, even the figures are somewhat insubstantial, and also the forces around them are also.
Yeah, I felt like the sky is almost like this shower that's sort of like washing all the bad things away, I feel like, I don't know, like I felt it within myself that this had to happen in a way.
That's a great painting. Shall we take questions?
Yes.
Yes, we shall. That was fantastic. I wanted to let it keep going. Thank you so much. So there are a couple questions for you, Ali. One being, do you continue to sense the sounds, tastes, etc. after the painting is complete? Does it continue to dialogue with you, or is it simply a message that's transmitted through you?
actually that answers Robert's questions, because he said, how do you know when it's finished? So when the work is finished is, okay, so like I have a particular, I think I talked to you about it, Patty, before, and
Yeah.
Robert, but like I have a particular system in the studio where I have my painting wall, the painting finishes, and then it goes onto another wall where it's sort of like sitting in an incubator where it's finished, but not really. I need to still come in every day and just like look at it and make sure it passes every personality of mine that comes in every day and looks at it and make sure it's finished. And I think I know when it's finished is when it really quiets down and it harmonizes. Like there's nothing that's sort of jumping out. There's no like loud sound or part. I mean, I've learned this over the years. In the past, you know, like say 10 years ago or something, I would get attached to a particular figure in the painting and I would think, this is the most important part of the painting. And every day I came in and that one would jump out at me. And I was like, what's wrong with the painting? And then I realized it's that thing that I need to destroy for the whole painting to kind of like, so I had to sacrifice the thing that I was attached to. So I think that's when I know when the painting is finished, and that's when all the sounds of the painting kind of quiets down, and it's like as if I've done my job. They're like harmonized together and they're activated and they're working together, and now I step away and, you know, now I've done my job and I need to like move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm. Great. There's an observation here, and it is something that we've talked about before, so I'm going to mention it as well. Jane writes, I felt overtones of Guernica, particularly due to scale and feeling. I would welcome the artist's reaction to that observation.
I mean, Guernica has been such an important painting for me. Just like I was mentioning Goya before, I feel like Guernica was a painting that sort of captured something, captured war, captured suffering, captured something in such a eternal way that I think forever we're just going to refer to that painting as a painting that's captured that. And also I think the scale of the painting, the ratio and the scale of the painting, having it be this sort of cinematic, sort of stretched out painting, it's had such an influence on a huge amount of, or I mean, like Lee Krasner was heavily influenced by that. After she saw that, like she started making those really like long paintings. So I think that's one of my favorite paintings for sure. That like I have the reproduction of it on the back of every door of studio I've ever had. So it's carried on.
That's a great observation by Jane.
Can I
She
add
also,
something?
yeah, go ahead.
I will add one thing about Lee Krasner. When she saw Guernica, she reported and said that she felt she had been socked in the solar plexus. And she had to go outside of the Museum of Modern Art and walk around the block in order to cool off, because it was such a powerful experience for her. And I think she was not alone.
What's better than that? I mean, if a painting could do that.
There's another question from Jane who says, in Hieronymous Bosch, there are recurring motifs. I'm thinking about owls, for example. Are there such common motifs that we should look at in your work? And if so, what meaning do they have to you?
That makes me think of something that when I was talking to Robert earlier, I was talking about Joseph Campbell and how I mean, because we were talking about Star Wars and how Star Wars was definitely, like Joseph Campbell was the Yoda for George Lucas, basically. So like one of the things that Joseph Campbell would say is that see images as symbolic, characters as archetypal, and narratives as mythic. So I think all these symbols and things are all like within us. So like these owls, you know, like these archetypal symbols and things are all within us. So I think going back to Pamuk, who said that we're always trying to remember what we already know. So you were like shining a light on it within ourselves. So I feel like with Bosch, like he was able to kind of like tap into that same place, you know, that maybe I can or other artists can, to sort of like open up those channels and have these like archetypal symbols, these Jungian symbols kind of like reveal themselves. But like, and yeah, like for me, there are certain, let's say, symbols that reoccur in my other paintings.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one more, which is a question again about things that you're looking at. So your paintings remind Eric of Ralph Bakshi's animation, specifically Wizards from 1977 and Lord of the Rings 1978, and Hayao Miyazaki's let's see, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind of 1984. Do you look at any kind of, has animation entered into your source of references?
Not that much, maybe. No. I mean, I don't know the ones you mentioned. I don't know them. I mean, I know Lord of the Rings, of course, but not the other ones.
Yeah.
I think again, I could answer it the same way. Going back to Joseph Campbell, I feel like these all come from. I mean, like if you look at like comparative religions, comparative mythologies, comparative philosophies, like it's all like a reoccurring story throughout history. Like go back to ancient Mesopotamian, you know, like I'm reading Gilgamesh right now, which is amazing for the second time. It's incredible. Actually, this figure here, some reason that's supposed to be Gilgamesh. But these are like reoccurring stories. Like they could go into pop culture, they could go into animations, they could go into films, they could go into books. But I'm interested in like the essence of it, you know, and the comparative aspect of it. Like how could a particular figure in like Hindu's Upanishad be similar to like say Christian, and be similar, you know, like these similar stories, like ancient Egyptian to Christian. So I think I'm always interested in like Robert was saying, like encyclopedic aspect of it and making comparison between them and seeing the same reoccurring sort of stories.
Yeah, in different cultures. So the same story, but told through different cultural lens. It's
yeah, like you look at the movie Matrix, which was heavily influenced by, let's say, Upanishad, but also like Philip K. Dick, and so it's quite interesting when you kind of like could break it down and see how far back it goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Ali and Robert. And I also want to give a shout out to Jana Israel, who organizes these programs seamlessly. So thank you so much. Ali's show, Matrix 185, will be on view at the Wadsworth through February 14th. So please come visit us if you can. And thanks again to Ali and Robert.